When it comes to competitive play in Battlefield games, it's hard to say what the ideal player count is, as in how many players are needed to fucking revive you once. I mean, how many players should be in each team.
Goodbye.
So recently I saw this tweet from a DICE developer called Jan David Hassel. He posed a question about the ideal team size for smaller, tactical and more competitive game modes. Now obviously about 3,000 people voting on this poll isn't gonna represent the whole Battlefield community, but it's a kind of sample check or small test on what players may prefer. Before I get into mine and others' opinion on this, let me just explain the different perspectives or sides you could take when asked this question. So firstly, the smallest format we've ever seen for Battlefield would be 4/5 players per team, unless you of course count events like Fun Cups and other stuff that have been 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2 team deathmatch. Although those are customly organized, they aren't actually developed that way in the game. Either way, when it comes to 4/5 players per team, you could first of all argue that it's fitting to have one full squad going up against another full squad. In fact, this is the most common format when it comes to competitive play in first-person shooter games today. Adopting that 4v4 or 5v5 format, which has been done many times in the history of competitive Battlefield, could of course be seen as blatant copying of already well-established esports scenes. But at the same time, you could argue that there is no need to reinvent the wheel. Using this smaller format, there has always been the argument that logistical things like LAN events and competitions overall are easier to organize the fewer the players there are on each team. Having been a team captain myself in competitive Battlefield, I know about the struggles of keeping even 4 other active players on the team to play matches and scrims consistently. And the more players you require, the harder it gets to organize, which is why a small team number is always going to be the easiest when it comes to organizing itself. Secondly, we have the 8v8 format. This is one that we have also seen before, and very recently as well actually with the introduction of Squad Conquest. According to David Sörland from DICE Stockholm, Squad Conquest has so far been a successful mode in the current Tides of War based test. The 8v8 format makes it more possible to keep the current Battlefield experience and stay original instead of actually competing with what's on the market currently. The thing is, when you get to 8 versus 8, this is usually when you introduce vehicles into competitive play as well, and that has upsides and downsides too. The biggest downside in my opinion is the fact that unless the vehicles are well balanced, they will become really hard to counter, and in some instances almost make matches straight up unfair to the point where the enemy team don't really stand a chance and are for instance trapped in their own spawn. At the same time, vehicles do add more depth and they contribute to the uniqueness of Battlefield, so it's kind of tricky. I think one good solution we've seen super recently is the fact that, for example on Rotterdam Squad Conquest, only the losing team gets a tank as a helping tool for them to come back in case they lost all flags. When it comes to formats larger than 8 versus 8, I guess you could say that the higher you go, the closer you get to that core Battlefield experience that the regular player is familiar with. If the competitive experience is similar to the experience you're used to playing as a non-competitive player, chances are you're gonna have an easier time getting into competitive play or even taking interest in watching a match, for example. At the same time, competition that is too large scale takes away importance in individual plays to some extent. And that is a big factor in esports. Another big factor is how well you can communicate with your team. And from my personal experience with playing 32 versus 32 player organized combat in Battlefield 4, communication was impossible with the entire team at once. We simply had to split the comms to each squad. This to me puts this kind of large-scale competition as a more cool to have type of competition, and it's not really suited for esports, at least not the way that esports looks today. So with all this being said, what is the best way to get as many positive aspects from each format as possible? Well, I guess you would need to compromise. In fact, we have seen EA and DICE trying to do exactly that fairly recently, with the likes of incursions being a 5v5 mode, but also including a vehicle and aiming for game modes based on taking or defending an objective. However, incursions never really had the success it could have had, and to be quite honest, I don't even think it was given a chance by the fact that it was never part of the base game and only a fraction of the community only ever tried it out. So how can successful compromisation really be done then? One thing is important. Everyone should play the same experience, or at least as many people as possible. I can't stress this enough. Having the same experience being played by your casual player base as well as your competitive one really is the key in order to bridge the gap between those players. We can't have the competitive mode released in a separate client, essentially being hidden from a lot of people and just not having it feel like it's even part of the game. What needs to happen is having a competitive game mode placed next to all the other core modes in Battlefield games, so that players even have a chance to find out that it exists and then hopefully try it out. So in conclusion, the ideal format could be a lot of different things, but in order to really bring the community together around competitive Battlefield, we need to be playing the same experience. Now, of course, multiple player counts have been supported for competitive play previously, but that just means dividing the already small competitive community even more. So preferably, let's at least have one game mode be the official competitive game mode, while everything else can of course still exist with the help of RSP, for example. When it came down to the poll results themselves, 8v8 seemed to be the most popular choice. That one, combined with the smallest format, actually make up for the majority of the poll. Could this mean that somewhere along those numbers is the sweet spot for a competitive game mode? Well, we can't know for sure, because I'm assuming most people who voted here are followers of Jan David Hassel, and they simply can't represent the opinion of the entire Battlefield community. With all this being said, I appreciate DICE showing interest in what the community wants from a competitive game mode, but if they really want to do this the proper way, they really should reach out to the people who have been grinding out competitive Battlefield for years in different types of formats and modes. There's a very hungry competitive community for the game that would love to be involved, and we have for a really long time now been wondering what EA and DICE are actually waiting for. However, now I want to know, in your opinion, what is the ideal amount of players on each team in order to cover the following things? A core Battlefield experience, depth in terms of how much you can master the game mode, at least fairly easy for players and teams to organize, logistics when traveling to and setting up, for example, LAN events, uniqueness from other competitive FPS titles while still being able to compete with them. What is the ideal amount of players on each team in your opinion? Please leave a comment down below. Also leave the word lökringar at the end of your comment and we will all see how many people made it this far into the video. Please consider subscribing if you are new here, as I will be uploading more similar content to this, namely what my take on the ideal game mode for competitive play is. But until the next video, I am PresidentSlendy and I wish you a fine day.
Oh fuck, 99, fuck my life.